Scalpel, nurse. Are you polishing it, or are you just that slow? Dr. Alastair Finch's voice was a whip crack in the sterile air of the Apex suite. Elara Vance, the rookie nurse they called the Mouse, silently placed it in his godlike hand, ignoring the snickers from his resident. Before the gallery of esteemed surgeons, Finch leaned in to make the final, critical incision of a career-defining surgery. But then, nothing. The scalpel hovered. The world-renowned surgeon's hand, a tool insured for millions, began to tremble. A bead of sweat traced a path down his temple. The god had forgotten how to fly. Panic began to ripple through the room. But while the titan froze, the mouse he had just crushed prepared to do the unthinkable. They had no idea the hands they had mocked were the only ones in the world that could save that patient's life, and in doing so, shatter the very foundations of this sacred room. The air in the Apex suite was colder than the polished steel of the instrument trays. It was an atmosphere of suspended reverence, a temple built to the god who was about to perform his sermon in flesh and bone. From the gallery above, a congregation of visiting surgeons and medical dignitaries watched in hushed silence, their faces illuminated by the glow of the massive screen displaying a high-definition feed of the surgical field. Today's deity was Dr. Alastair Finch, and this complex craniotomy, the removal of a tumor entwined with the patient's motor cortex, was set to be his masterpiece. He entered not like a surgeon, but like a conductor taking the stage, soaking in the silent, palpable awe. His scrubs were custom-tailored, his posture impeccable. Dr. Isabella Rossi, his resident, trailed him like a shadow, her expression a practiced mix of admiration and ambition. At the head of the table, Marcus Thorne, the senior anesthesiologist, offered Finch a curt nod from behind his fortress of monitors, his face a mask of professional boredom that failed to hide a glint of cynical amusement. He'd seen 100 gods like Finch. And then there was Elara Vance. Tucked away by her sterile instrument stand, she was the stagehand in this grand production, meant to be invisible and silent. She had been in the Apex suite for 2 hours already, long before anyone else, meticulously arranging every clamp, every scalpel, every length of suture. Her movements were a silent ballet of efficiency, each tool placed with an intuitive understanding of the surgical flow. But in this world, her diligence was not seen as a virtue, but as a symptom of her lowly station. Still counting the forceps, Nurse Vance? Finch's voice boomed, startling her. He was now gloved and gowned, a towering figure of authority. We do have a life to save, assuming your arithmetic is finished. Dr. Rossi let out a sharp, appreciative laugh. She's just being thorough, sir. It must take a while when you have to use your fingers to count. Elara's cheeks burned, but she kept her eyes down, her voice soft and even. Everything is ready, doctor. She offered no defense, no protest. Arguing here was like arguing with the tide, it only served to drown you faster. The surgery began. Finch was a maestro of motion, his hands moving with an arrogant grace. He narrated his work for the gallery, his voice smooth and confident, each sentence polished to enhance his own legend. Notice the precision required here, a millimeter to the left, and we compromise motor function. It is a line only a steady hand can walk. Elara worked seamlessly, anticipating his every need. A retractor was in his hand the instant his fingers began to open for it. Suction was applied the moment a vessel bled. She was a flawless extension of his will, her mind 3 steps ahead of the procedure. But her proficiency only seemed to irritate him. Don't get ahead of yourself, nurse, he snapped, not even looking at her as he took a cauterizing tool from her hand. Your function in this room is to react, not to think. It is a simple concept, yet it seems to elude you. Later, as he prepared to excise the first part of the tumor, he barked, suture. 4-0 proline. Elara immediately placed the delicate, blue-threaded needle holder in his palm. He held it up to the light, his eyes narrowing dramatically. He turned to Rossi. Dr. Rossi, an object lesson for you. What do you see here? Rossi peered at it, confused. F4-0 proline suture, sir. Look closer, Finch commanded, his voice dripping with condescending patience. Look at the needle's curvature. This is the CV-23. I asked for the BV1. A minute difference to the untrained eye, but a critical one for this specific tissue. This is the kind of sloppiness, the kind of inattention to detail, that creates complications. He tossed the perfectly acceptable, and in fact, correct suture onto a side tray with a clatter of theatrical disgust. This is what happens when we lower our standards. Now, nurse, retrieve the correct instrument, and let us hope you can manage that without further incident. The humiliation was a physical blow. Every eye in the gallery felt like a laser beam on her back. She knew, with absolute certainty, that the BV1 needle was for vascular anastomosis, not for this specific dural closure. The CV23 was standard. He wasn't just wrong, he was wrong loudly and performatively, for the sole purpose of putting her down. Thorne sighed audibly from behind his monitors, a sound of weary disdain for the whole charade. Elara said nothing. She turned, her movements calm and deliberate, and picked up another 4-0 proline suture, the exact same type she had given him before, and handed it to him. Ah, Finch said, examining it with a satisfied nod. There we are. See, Dr. Rossi? Precision. He accepted the instrument without a hint of irony, and the surgery continued. Elara retreated back into her silent, efficient shell, but inside, a cold, hard knot of anger was forming. She pushed it down, channeling all her focus into the patient on the table, into the rhythm of the monitors, into the delicate dance of the operation. Her personal feelings were a luxury that could not be afforded here. The patient's life was the only thing that mattered. As they approached the deepest and most dangerous part of the resection, Finch's arrogance swelled to its peak. The tumor was now fully exposed, a treacherous landscape of abnormal tissue clinging to the brain's most vital territory. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the climax of his performance. And now, he announced to the room and the gallery beyond, for the part they call impossible. He extended his hand, palm up, a king demanding his scepter. Scalpel. Elara placed the cold, familiar weight of the number 11 scalpel into his outstretched hand. The room held its collective breath. On the screen above, the magnified view of the patient's brain was an alien landscape, beautiful and terrifying. The tumor, a dark mass, was fused to the delicate wall of the middle cerebral artery. The slightest slip, the barest tremor, would mean a catastrophic hemorrhage. This was the razor's edge where legends were forged, and Dr. Finch had built his kingdom upon it. He leaned in, the tip of the blade hovering over the critical junction. But he did not cut. A second passed. Then two. It was a pause so slight that at first, it felt like dramatic tension, another of his theatrical flourishes for the audience. But Elara saw it for what it was. From her vantage point, she could see the microscopic twitch in his forearm, the subtle tightening of his jaw beneath his surgical mask. She saw the god hesitate. His confidence, as vast and unshakable as an ocean, had just met an unexpected shore. The angle was wrong. The tissue was more friable, more treacherous than the scans had suggested. The clear, confident path he had mapped out in his mind had vanished, replaced by a maze of deadly possibilities. A single, cold bead of sweat broke free from his hairline and traced a path down his temple. He masked it with fury. Suction, he roared, his voice cracking slightly. Nurse, are you blind? Get that fluid out of my line of sight. Now. Elara was already there, the tip of the suction tube silently clearing the minuscule amount of seepage, her movements economical and precise. She had been nowhere near his line of sight. The outburst was not about her, it was a desperate flare fired from a sinking ship. Marcus Thorne's calm, detached voice cut through the tension from behind his monitors. Vitals are steady, Alistair. But his pressure is starting to creep up. The brain doesn't like being exposed this long. It was a professional observation, but it carried the weight of a challenge. What's the holdup? The implied question pushed Finch over the edge. Rattled, exposed, and furious that his moment of weakness had been perceived, he turned his full, desperate wrath on the only person in the room he knew wouldn't fight back. He lifted the scalpel, his hand now visibly trembling not with surgical precision, but with rage. This blade, he seethed, holding it up for everyone to see, a prosecutor presenting damning evidence. It's dull. It feels unbalanced in my hand. Did you even inspect it, or did you just pull it from the wrapper and assume it was adequate? He glared at Elara, his eyes promising consequences that would end her fledgling career before it had even begun. This is the instrument I am expected to perform a miracle with? A tool fit for a back-alley butcher. Do you have any concept of what is at stake here, Nurse Vance? A man's life is in my hands, and you give me this piece of useless metal. The injustice of it was breathtaking. Every instrument in the Apex suite was of the highest possible quality, checked and rechecked. He was inventing a flaw, creating a scapegoat for the failure that was curdling in his own gut. Dr. Rossi, sensing the shift in power and seeing her mentor falter, made a calculated decision. She chose her side. Unacceptable, she declared, her voice sharp and eager to please Finch. Sir, I can prepare another tray myself. Her negligence is a liability to the patient. She began moving, ready to throw Elara to the wolves to save the sanctity of her god. But it was too late. The damage was done. Another nurse, sensing the impending catastrophe, had already procured a new scalpel and handed it to Finch. He took it, but his hand felt alien to him, a clumsy appendage he no longer controlled. He looked from the new blade back to the exposed brain. The monitors began to scream. BP is spiking, 190 over 110. Thorne announced, his voice losing its cynical edge and gaining a new, urgent command. He's heading for a stroke on the table. Alistair, you need to finish now. Finch raised the new scalpel. He leaned in again. But his nerve was gone. The intricate map in his mind was now a blank, terrifying void. He couldn't see the path. He couldn't feel the line. The gallery was a blur of horrified faces. Rossi's panicked whispers of "Sir" were a distant buzz. Thorne's orders for hypertensive medications were just noise. The world-renowned surgeon, the god of the operating room, simply froze. His hand was locked in midair, the scalpel hovering uselessly over the patient. His eyes were wide, staring into the chasm of his own failure. The seconds stretched into an eternity of silent, screeching panic. The Titan had fallen, and in his place was just a man, paralyzed by fear, as a life balanced on the edge of the blade he could no longer wield. The impossible challenge had been laid bare, complete a surgery that had just broken its master, before the patient was lost forever. A world-famous surgeon is paralyzed. A patient's life is seconds from being lost. The entire room is descending into chaos, and the only person who knows what to do is the one they've all dismissed. We tell stories about moments just like this, moments where the overlooked and underestimated find the courage to reveal their hidden greatness. If you believe in the power of the underdog and want to see how Elara is about to turn this entire room on its head, then take 1 second and hit that subscribe button. The most incredible part of this story is about to begin, and you won't want to miss a single second of it. The alarms were a symphony of impending death. The patient's blood pressure was skyrocketing, and the surgical field, once a pristine canvas, was now obscured by a slow, steady bleed that Finch had ignored. Dr. Rossi was frantically whispering, "Sir? Dr. Finch?" Alistair, her words swallowed by the rising panic. Marcus Thorne was a machine of damage control, his voice a torrent of orders for 4 pushes of labetalol and sodium nitroprusside. "Get that pressure down or he's going to seize and stroke out right here. I need a response, Alistair." But Alistair Finch was gone. His eyes stared blankly at the brain before him, a landscape that had become his personal hell. He was a statue of failure. The gallery was in chaos, hospital administrators on their phones, surgeons shouting in disbelief and horror. In the midst of this vortex of panic, Elara Vance was an island of perfect calm. For a lifetime, she had been told to be quiet, to stay small, to follow orders. She had obeyed, fading into the background, swallowing every insult, every condescending glance. But as she looked at the dying patient on the table and the broken man who was supposed to save him, a lifetime of suppressed conviction ignited within her. The vow she had made to herself as a young girl studying her father's intricate watches, that these hands were meant to heal, eclipsed every protocol, every fear, every rule. She set down the instrument she was holding with a soft, deliberate click. She walked around the table, her steps measured and sure, directly to Dr. Finch. The chaos seemed to part for her. Her voice, when it came, was not the timid whisper they were used to. It was clear, steady, and sharp as a scalpel. "Doctor." "Step aside." Rossi turned on her, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. "Have you lost your mind, nurse? Get back to your station." "Security." But Elara's eyes never left Finch's. She reached out and, with a gentleness that belied the sheer audacity of the act, she curled her fingers around the scalpel still clutched in his paralyzed hand and gently removed it. He let it go without resistance. His hand was cold and clammy. Then she placed her hand on his shoulder and firmly, but not unkindly, guided him backward, away from the table. He stumbled like a man in a trance. Elara Vance took his place. For a moment, the entire hospital seemed to hold its breath. The alarms, Thorne's commands, the frantic calls from the gallery, it all faded into a stunned, electric silence. The rookie nurse, the mouse, was now standing at the head of the operating table, in the spot reserved for the god of surgery. Her transformation was absolute. The slump in her shoulders was gone, replaced by a straight, confident posture. Her eyes, magnified by her simple glasses, scanned the surgical field, the monitors, the instruments, absorbing every piece of data with terrifying speed. She saw the problem. She saw the bleed. She saw the path. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, ringing with an authority no one had ever heard from her. "I need his pressure at 130 systolic for the next 7 minutes. Can you give me that?" Thorne was so shocked he almost didn't answer. He looked at this completely new person, then at the vitals, and his years of experience took over. This was a voice of competence. "I can try," he grunted, already adjusting his drips. "Dr. Rossi," Elara continued, her gaze fixed on the wound. "Suction. Right here. Follow my lead precisely. Keep the field clear but do not touch the arterial wall." Rossi was frozen, caught between the sheer, career-ending insanity of the situation and the undeniable command in Elara's voice. She found herself picking up the suction tube, her movements clumsy, robotic. In the gallery, the hospital's chief administrator was shouting into his phone for orderlies to remove her, but a hand on his arm stopped him. It was Dr. Kenji Tanaka, a visiting luminary from Osaka, a man whose name was whispered with reverence in the world of microsurgery. "Stop," Tanaka said, his accented English quiet but firm. His eyes, which had been watching Finch's performance with polite disinterest, were now wide with a look of intense, almost ravenous focus. "Wait." He saw something nobody else did, the way she held the blade, the economy of her posture, the impossible calm in her eyes. He recognized a fellow master. Elara raised the scalpel. Her hand was as steady as granite. Then, she moved. It was not surgery. It was artistry. The blade descended, a flash of silver, and in a single, fluid motion, she isolated the source of the bleed, a microartery Finch had nicked in his initial, arrogant approach. Without a moment's hesitation, she called for a microcautery tool. It was in her hand, and in the next second, the vessel was sealed. The bleeding stopped. Just like that. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. The chief administrator's mouth hung open. Elara didn't pause to acknowledge it. She was already working, her hands a blur. 4-0 proline, she commanded. Rossi, still in a daze, handed it to her. Elara's subsequent stitch was a thing of impossible beauty, tiny, perfect, and executed in a fraction of the time it would have taken even Finch on his best day. She was not just following the steps, she was dancing through them, her innate understanding of the brain's delicate architecture allowing her to move with a speed and confidence that bordered on supernatural. Dr. Tanaka, in the gallery, leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the railing. He whispered a single word in Japanese to himself, a word of ultimate praise reserved for the highest level of mastery, Meijin. A master. The operating room had transformed. The frantic chaos had been replaced by a new kind of tension, a taut, focused silence, punctuated only by the rhythmic beep of the stable heart monitor and Elara's quiet, confident commands. She was not just continuing the surgery, she was reinventing it. She moved past Finch's clumsy damage control and began to address the very challenge that had broken him, the section of the tumor that was fused to the artery. Dr. Rossi, who minutes before had been ready to have Elara thrown out, was now her unwilling first mate. A storm of emotions warred within her, the sting of her own misjudgment, the terror of her career being associated with this unprecedented breach of protocol, and a growing, undeniable sense of awe. As a surgical resident, she understood the anatomy on the screen better than most. She knew the textbooks, the accepted techniques. And she knew that what Elara was doing was not in any of them. Elara was improvising, her hands moving with an intuitive genius that defied every known parameter. Rossi found her own hands moving with newfound purpose, no longer questioning, simply reacting to Elara's lead. The mouse had become the master, and Rossi, the arrogant protege, was now the humbled apprentice. From his station, Marcus Thorne watched, a slow smile spreading beneath his mask. For 30 years, he had seen surgeons of all stripes, the butchers, the technicians, the artists, and the gods like Finch who demanded to be worshipped. But this was something new. The girl gave no speeches. She took no credit. Her focus was absolute, her ego non-existent. She was a pure instrument of healing. The patient's vitals had settled into a perfect, steady rhythm, as if the man's unconscious body had recognized the transfer of power and placed its trust in these new, steadier hands. Well, I'll be damned, Thorne whispered to himself, his cynical heart feeling a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years, hope. But for Dr. Alastair Finch, this was not a miracle. It was a slow, agonizing execution of his soul. He had staggered back to the wall of the operating room, his towering presence shrunken, pathetic. He watched the screen, his mind finally catching up to the horror of what was happening. He was watching the nurse he had mocked, the woman he had publicly humiliated over a suture, perform a feat of surgical brilliance that he, with all his awards and accolades, knew he was incapable of. She wasn't just completing his surgery, she was exposing his entire career as a hollow performance. He saw the subtle wrist flick she used to angle the blade, a technique that allowed for a cleaner cut with less tissue damage. He saw how she used the patient's own faint respiratory movements to create a window for her instruments. These weren't just the actions of a competent surgeon, they were the innovations of a prodigy. The great Dr. Finch was forced to watch as his legacy was dismantled, stitch by stitch, by the hands of a nobody he had tried to crush. In the gallery, Dr. Tanaka had become a narrator, explaining the miracle to the dumbfounded hospital administrator next to him. "Do you see?" Tanaka said, his voice electric with discovery, pointing a finger at the screen. "Conventional wisdom dictates you attack the tumor from the superior aspect. It is safer, but slower, and risks thermal damage to the arterial wall from the cautery. She has done the opposite. She is using a translaminar approach, coming from underneath. It is incredibly dangerous, a high-wire act without a net." He paused, his eyes wide. "Look. She is using the reflected light from the microscope on the saline solution to see the underside of the vessel. She created her own guide. This is not something you can teach." He turned to the administrator, his face alight. "Who is she? Where did you find her?" The administrator could only shake his head, utterly speechless. The final moment arrived. The last, most tenacious piece of the tumor remained, a tiny island of malignancy clinging to the artery like a parasite. This was the precipice. Elara's hands, which had been moving at an astonishing pace, slowed to an almost imperceptible crawl. The room became so quiet that the soft hum of the ventilation system sounded like a roar. Every eye was locked on the screen, watching the magnified tip of her scalpel. She gently nudged the artery with a microdissector, watching its pulse, feeling its rhythm. She was not fighting the body, she was in dialogue with it. Then, in a single, sublime movement that was less a cut and more a whisper of the blade against tissue, she severed the final connection. The tumor came free. It floated for a moment in the small pool of saline, a conquered dragon in a crimson sea. The artery, now liberated, pulsed strongly, its wall pristine and unharmed. There was no bleeding. No damage. It was perfect. A profound, breathless silence descended upon the Apex suite. The surgery was done. The impossible had been achieved. And the world had just been turned upside down. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in the Apex suite was the steady, reassuring beep of the heart monitor. The tumor was in a specimen dish. The artery was perfect. The patient was safe. In the gallery, surgeons and dignitaries were frozen, their minds struggling to process the miracle they had just seen. In the operating room, the team stood as if turned to stone, staring at the empty space where the inoperable tumor had been. The spell was broken not by a cheer or a gasp, but by Elara's voice, as calm and quiet as it had been when she first started. "Irrigation," she said simply, turning to Dr. Rossi. "Gently. We need to ensure the field is clean before we close." The sheer, humble professionalism of the command was almost as shocking as the surgery itself. She wasn't looking for praise. She wasn't acknowledging her revolutionary feat. She was just a medical professional, focused on the final steps of her patient's care. This simple act of diligence, of seeing the job through to its mundane conclusion, was the final, undeniable proof of her character. It wasn't about glory, it was about healing. That's when the gallery finally erupted. The dam of stunned silence broke into a tidal wave of sound. It started as a murmur, then swelled into a roar of excited, disbelieving chatter. Surgeons were on their feet, clapping, pointing at the screen, and debating the revolutionary technique they had just witnessed. The hospital administrator, looking pale and clutching his chest, was now being slapped on the back by board members who smelled a Nobel Prize and 9-figure donations. Above the din, Dr. Tanaka's voice was a beacon of clarity and authority. He turned to the stunned administrator, his eyes blazing with the fire of discovery. "I have been a surgeon for 45 years, he declared, his voice cutting through the noise. "I have operated in the finest hospitals in the world, alongside men and women considered living legends. I tell you now, what I just witnessed is something that will be taught in medical schools for the next century." He shook his head, a look of profound wonder on his face. "That is not a skill one learns, it is a gift one is born with. That young woman, she is a maestro." Without another word, he turned and marched purposefully towards the exit, intent on getting down to the operating room floor. He had to meet the artist. Down below, the atmosphere had been permanently altered. Dr. Rossi, her face hidden behind her mask, worked with a newfound, quiet humility. She irrigated and suctioned as commanded, her eyes fixated on Elara's hands as they began the process of closing the duromater. Elara's stitches were flawless, each one perfectly spaced, perfectly tightened, creating a waterproof seal that was a work of art in itself. Rossi realized with a sickening lurch that in 10 minutes, this rookie nurse had taught her more about surgery, and about humility, than Dr. Finch had in 2 years. Marcus Thorne, the cynic, was the first to give her the respect she had earned. His voice came over the room's intercom, devoid of its usual sarcasm. "Nurse Vance," he said, and the use of her proper name was a statement in itself. "The patient is completely stable. Vitals are textbook perfect. Whatever you did in there, it was magnificent." Elara simply nodded, not looking up from her work. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne. Let's get him to recovery safely." The sound of applause from the gallery, filtering down into the OR, was the final blow for Alastair Finch. He had been watching, paralyzed, as his entire world was dismantled. The awe, the respect, the adulation in that room, it was all supposed to be for him. He looked at the screen, at the perfect closure being performed by the mouse. He looked at his own hands, the golden hands, which now felt like useless, clumsy lumps of clay. He was a king who had just watched a peasant effortlessly draw the sword from the stone. There was nothing left for him here. With a choked, guttural sound, he pushed himself off the wall and stumbled towards the exit, a ghost leaving his own haunting ground, unable to witness another moment of her quiet, devastating triumph. Elara guided the team through the final stages with unwavering focus. The bone flap was secured with titanium microplates. The scalp was closed with a subcuticular stitch so fine it would leave almost no scar. She treated every step with the same importance as the main event. Finally, it was over. The last dressing was applied. The surgical drapes were pulled back, revealing the patient, peacefully asleep, saved. She took a small step back from the table, her body slumping ever so slightly as the immense pressure she'd been under finally began to recede. For the first time, she looked down at her own hands, still clad in their sterile gloves, now flecked with the patient's blood. She stared at them, a flicker of wonder in her own eyes, as if she, too, was just now realizing what they were capable of. The door to the OR swished open, and the sound of the world rushing in to meet its newest, most unlikely legend, began. The moment the operating room door hissed open, the sterile bubble of quiet focus burst. A wave of noise and bodies crashed in. At its crest was Dr. Kenji Tanaka, his eyes alight with an almost spiritual fervor. Behind him crowded the hospital's chief administrator, Charles Worthington, his face a chaotic mix of relief and panic, followed by a half-dozen senior surgeons from the gallery, all talking at once. Incredible. Young lady, what is your name? I've never seen a technique like that. Where did you train? The praise and questions buffeted Elara, who instinctively took a step back, shrinking away from the sudden, blinding spotlight. The attention was a physical force, and she felt herself retreating into the familiar shell of the invisible nurse. She deflected their praise with the only thing that mattered to her. The patient, she said, her voice soft again, but clear. He needs to be transferred to the neuro ICU immediately. His first 6 hours post-op are critical. This simple, professional statement, this utter lack of self-congratulation, did more to impress the assembled surgeons than her supernatural skill had. It was proof of her core character. Dr. Tanaka raised a hand, and the room fell silent. He approached Elara not with the condescension she was used to, but with the deep, abiding respect of one master to another. They will take care of the patient, he said, his voice gentle. He is safe, thanks to you. I have one question, and it is the most important one you will be asked today. Who are you? Before Elara could answer, Worthington, the administrator, interjected, his voice slick with newfound admiration. This is Nurse Elara Vance, one of our newest hires. Tanaka ignored him, his eyes locked on Elara's. No, he corrected gently. That is your job title. That is not who you are. Who you are is the most gifted surgeon I have had the privilege to witness in my lifetime. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of profound respect that sent a shockwave through the room. A talent like yours cannot be allowed to languish in the shadows. It is a crime against medicine. I am the head of neurosurgery at the Osaka National Institute. I am offering you, right now, a full fellowship. We will bypass your residency. We will sponsor your entire medical degree. Anything you require, you will have. The world cannot afford for you to spend another day handing instruments to lesser men. The offer hung in the air, a life-changing thunderbolt. Elara was speechless, her mind reeling. Worthington, ever the opportunist, saw his chance to begin the cleanup. His hospital had been saved from a catastrophic, reputation-destroying failure by an uncredited nurse. He needed to reframe the narrative immediately. He turned his attention to Dr. Rossi, who was standing frozen by the instrument tray, a deer in the headlights. Dr. Rossi, Worthington's voice was ice. While a miracle was being performed, I am told by several witnesses that you not only failed to recognize the escalating situation, but you actively attempted to obstruct Nurse Vance. Is that correct? Rossi paled. Dr. Finch was. I was following protocol. Your protocol, Worthington snapped, is patient safety. You chose to protect a failing ego instead. Your ambition has shown a grievous lack of judgment. You are on administrative leave, effective immediately. A full review board will determine your future at this hospital. The first domino had fallen. Rossi looked as though she'd been struck, the public humiliation a bitter taste of the medicine she had so eagerly dispensed to Elara. Next was Thorne. He had already begun the process of extubating the patient, his professionalism a stark contrast to the drama. Worthington nodded at him. "Mr. Thorne, your conduct under extreme pressure has been noted and will be commended." Thorne, however, was not interested in the administrator's praise. He finished his work, and as the team prepared to move the patient, he walked over to Elara, pulling down his mask. His cynical, world-weary eyes were, for the first time, completely sincere. "Vance," he said, his voice low so only she could hear. "For what it's worth, I was an ass. For years, I've just been punching the clock, watching the egos fly. I forgot what this was all supposed to be about." He met her gaze directly. "Today, you reminded me. Don't let them change you." With a final, respectful nod, he walked away, a man whose hardened shell had been cracked open. Elara felt dizzy. The job offer, the praise, Rossi's downfall, Thorne's apology, it was too much. This world of applause and politics was not hers. While Worthington and Tanaka began a heated discussion about her future, Elara saw her chance. Her shift was over. Her patient was safe. That was all that mattered. Silently, she slipped through the crowd of backslapping surgeons and made her way to the door. She didn't look back. She walked down the sterile hallway, the sounds of her sudden fame fading behind her, heading for the quiet anonymity of the locker room. All she wanted was to take off her scrubs and go home. The locker room was a silent, fluorescent-lit sanctuary. The distant sounds of the hospital, the frantic energy, the ringing phones, the excited voices discussing her name, couldn't penetrate these walls. Here, she was not maestro or miracle worker. She was just Elara. The adrenaline from the surgery was finally ebbing away, leaving a profound, bone-deep weariness in its place. She slowly peeled off the scrubs, the uniform of her invisibility, and let them fall into the laundry bin. She pulled on her own clothes, a pair of worn-in jeans, a simple gray sweater, and comfortable flats. The transformation was complete. The surgical prodigy vanished, and in her place was the quiet woman who rode the bus home every evening. As she was about to leave, she glanced through the reinforced window of the staff exit and saw him. Dr. Finch. He was standing by the curb, no longer a god, but a specter. Charles Worthington, the administrator, was speaking to him, his words inaudible but his gestures sharp and dismissive. Finch looked utterly broken. His custom scrubs were rumpled, his famous posture was a defeated slump, and his hands, the golden hands he had built his legend upon, were stuffed deep into his pockets, as if he were ashamed of them. He was a king without a kingdom, a performer without a stage. His justice was swift and absolute. The board's emergency meeting was already over. His surgical privileges were suspended indefinitely, a formality before the inevitable revocation of his license. The family of the wealthy patient he had nearly killed would file a lawsuit that would strip him of his fortune. The lucrative consulting contracts, the speaking engagements, the worshipful articles in medical journals, all would vanish like smoke. But Elara knew his real punishment was not external. It was the internal cancer of his own shattered ego. He had been undone, not by a celebrated rival, but by the insignificant mouse he had tried to crush under his heel. He would never enter an operating room again, not because he was banned, but because his nerve was gone, his confidence ground into dust. He was no longer a surgeon, he was a cautionary tale. Worthington finished speaking, turned his back on Finch without a handshake, and walked briskly back into the hospital, leaving the fallen god to wait for a taxi in the twilight. Elara turned away from the window and pushed the door open, stepping out into the cool evening air. She didn't walk toward the waiting taxi line or the bustling main entrance. She took her usual route, a quiet side street that led away from the hospital's grand facade. The walk home was not a victory lap. It was a slow, contemplative journey. The city lights began to bloom around her, but she barely noticed. She wasn't thinking about Dr. Tanaka's life-changing offer, or the stunned faces in the gallery, or even Finch's pathetic downfall. She was thinking about her hands. She felt a strange new lightness within her, as if a heavy, invisible cloak she had worn her entire life had finally dissolved. The gnawing voice of self-doubt, the one that whispered she wasn't smart enough, strong enough, or good enough, was silent for the first time. She didn't need a gallery of experts to tell her she had value. She had held a man's life in her hands and had not faltered. She had faced down the god of the Apex Suite and had proven immortal. She had finally, truly, met herself. Her apartment was small and simple, a third-floor walk-up far from the gleaming towers of the medical district. It was her real sanctuary. The shelves were filled not with trinkets, but with worn anatomy textbooks. On a small, meticulously organized workbench by the window sat her father's old watchmaking tools, the loops, the delicate forceps, the tiny drivers that had given her hands their first education in precision. This room was where the maestro was truly born, and quiet nights spent practicing sutures on a piece of silicone, driven not by a desire for fame, but by a pure, unshakable love for the intricate mechanics of life. She sat down at the bench, the city lights twinkling outside her window. Her phone buzzed on the counter, the screen lighting up with a name she didn't recognize, likely Worthington or even Dr. Tanaka, ready to change her life. A week ago, a call like that would have sent her into a spiral of anxiety. She would have been too scared to answer, too certain she was unworthy of the attention. Tonight, she simply looked at the buzzing phone, then back at her own hands. She picked up a pair of her father's finest forceps, the cool metal a familiar comfort in her palm. A slow, quiet smile touched her lips. Her value wasn't waiting on that phone call. It wasn't in Osaka, or in the Apex Suite. It was right here, in this room. It was in her hands. Whatever came next, she would face it on her own terms. The mouse was done hiding. Elara's story is a powerful reminder that true worth isn't measured by titles or the opinions of others. It's a quiet strength, a hidden talent, waiting for its moment to change the world. So many of us have felt overlooked or underestimated, just like her, waiting for the chance to show what we're capable of. We want to build a community around stories like this. So, we have a question for you. What was your favorite moment of justice in this story? Was it when the arrogant Dr. Finch froze, or when the great Dr. Tanaka recognized Elara's genius instantly? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. If you believe that the underdog deserves to win and want more stories that inspire you to find the hero within yourself, then make sure to follow our channel and join our community. You won't want to miss what's next.